Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well, that you had a nice beginning of the week. And welcome back on the channel for this new interview with a member of the European Parliament. Tonight we will discuss with MEP Tineke Strik from the political group of the Greens, so on the left side of EU politics. She's 60 years old. She has been a Dutch MEP since 2019, so it's a first mandate in the European Parliament. She is a member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs, and she's a substitute in the Subcommittee on Human Rights. And generally speaking, so that you have a sense of what we're going to discuss tonight, she specializes more or less on migration policy, asylum policy, and the rule of law. So as usual, before I start our conversation, I remind the house rules for anyone who is new with us tonight. So our guest will be with us for about an hour. After that, she will go and enjoy the rest of her evening or work, since it's a plenary week. And you will have to stick with me for another half an hour, where I will be debriefing the interview, giving additional context element if necessary, and generally speaking, chat with you. As usual, I have prepared my own questions, and I have collected questions as well from you guys on Reddit and elsewhere. You can, of course, ask your own questions in the chat. I will keep an eye on it, and I will pick among your suggestions. So feel free to react and to participate. But as always, don't spam and stay civil. The goal of these interviews, as you know, is for you to better understand what MEP do in the European Parliament, what are their priorities, some of their opinion about the European Union, and some of things that happen in the news. I try to invite people from all kind of different groups, and so tonight we're having a Greens. Last week we had someone from Renew, we had people from EPP, the left, etc. So you have a wide array of opinion here on the channel to help you make your own opinion and witness the diversity of the EU debate. Also worth mentioning, we will not go too deep into policy discussions, so that we don't get lost in a tunnel for 2 hours, however interesting it might be. And we will not cover national politics unless it's relevant to EU politics. So keep that in mind when asking your own question. And on this note, well, I suggest that we start. Good evening, Mrs. Strik. Thank you. Welcome on the channel, and thank you again for coming and taking the time to be with us tonight. So you heard me doing the introduction, introducing you and explaining a bit the goal of this interview. So perhaps to start a bit our conversation, I would ask you if you could complete what I said about in your introduction, speak about what you do in the Parliament, that sort of thing, and we'll pick up from there.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me, and also my compliments for this project, because also for us it's very important, of course, that it becomes more transparent who we are and what we are doing, because we depend on citizens' involvement, of course. Yes, you were very right. I work on asylum, migration, rule of law issues. For the Green Group, I'm coordinator of the LIBE committee, and the LIBE committee is one of the committees in the Parliament which is responsible for most of the legislation, because it deals with security, justice, data protection, police cooperation, asylum, migration, citizenship. So many different topics are there. Also, rule of law issues are very much discussed and monitored in that committee. So, because I'm the coordinator, I am a little bit involved in all different types of these issues. For instance, half a year ago, I negotiated also the COVID-19 passport that you need to have in order to cross the borders in the EU, because it's related to borders, of course, and also to fundamental rights. So there it was the coordinators of LIBE that negotiated on this instrument. Furthermore, I work a lot indeed on the Schengen borders, but also on Frontex. We have different types of monitoring groups, so to say. So we try to find out how, in this case, Frontex is performing its tasks, but also how member states comply with the Schengen obligation, namely to make sure that there are no internal border controls and to make sure that there's a good external border control in compliance with the rules, including also the human rights. So this is what I do in Libe. And furthermore, I also member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, where I am responsible for the Greens for the situation in Afghanistan, which is now very tense, of course. I'm also member in the delegation for North Macedonia, which is now of interest because, well, they're still waiting for the decision in the council to start the accession talks together with Albania. And I'm also responsible for Bosnia-Herzegovina. And this is also very much at stake at the moment because there are high tensions in Bosnia-Herzegovina at the moment. And therefore, tomorrow I will go for a working visit to find out what we can do more also as members of the European Parliament. And I'm member, as you said, of the Human Rights Committee. And because I wanted to bridge the different committees and really use my expertise, because I'm also professor on citizenship and migration law. So I really want to benefit from this expertise also in my work here, is that I was a rapporteur on let's say, the external dimension of asylum and migration policy, to see how the EU is cooperating with third countries on migration. Maybe you know the type of deals that the EU has struck with, for instance, Turkey and many other countries. And I have looked into how this is meeting all our human rights obligations. So I can explain a little bit more about that later.
Yeah, well, we'll cover all that because I mean, we already have quite a lot of interesting things to discuss. So perhaps starting from the beginning. So you mentioned Frontex. So Frontex is the EU agency in charge of helping member states deal with their borders. So perhaps beyond the name Frontex that people may have heard in the news, can you explain a bit what Frontex actually does? Because Frontex, we know it exists, but it's a bit blurry what it actually do.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it is an agency. The EU has a lot of agencies that have a specific mandate or task, implementing actually EU law. And Frontex has been created, I think, in 2003, something like that, in order to assist member states, especially the member states at the external borders, in assisting them with guarding, with border control, so to say. They do not have their own competences. They cannot control the borders themselves because it's still the sovereignty, the competence of the member states themselves. But they can advise and they act under instruction, actually, of those countries where they work. And in the beginning, they were very small, and the Frontex teams more or less consisted of national border guards that were, let's say, that were deployed in other member states, so on behalf of Frontex. But throughout the years, it has grown significantly. And not so long ago, 2 years ago, the council decided that Frontex should have its own border guards. So the idea is now that Frontex can grow up to 10,000 own border guards. And they have also grown in the tasks that they have. So they do not now only work in border control, but also in returning people. They can also assist member states there, and they also cooperate with third countries. So countries outside the EU where they assist in border control and advising, etc. And well, what is actually under discussion during the last few years is, okay, if it's not an independently operating, to what extent can it be held responsible and accountable for if things go wrong at the border? Because we have seen a lot of allegations about pushbacks, so that people who are not able to enter the territory, to ask for asylum, to get access to an asylum procedure, and also more and more the role of Frontex there was debated, was under discussion, especially last autumn, so a year ago. Some investigative journalists released reports and evidence that Frontex was involved in some of the pushbacks undertaken by the Greek authorities in the Aegean Sea. And that has led to the establishment of a Frontex scrutiny group, working group, in the European Parliament, because we really wanted to exactly find out what Frontex is doing with allegations, so or other signals that Greek or Croatian or other border guards may not comply with the rules.
And so, what did the scrutiny group find out? Were the allegations true? Not true? What was the result?
Well, we did not really, for us it was very difficult to look into what exactly Frontex did or did not at the border, but we found out that in some of these cases they were indeed aware and they were informed about pushback actions, and we found out that in their system they do not respond adequately. That they, in some cases, they did some investigations, but in the end, when the Greek government said no, it didn't happen, they just left it there. So nothing happened with that. Okay. Well, that was, of course, a very serious conclusions that we drew. And we also looked at the whole mechanism. I mean, there is a complaint mechanism. There is a possibility for border guards to file a serious incident report if they see something happening. And we found out that all these mechanisms do not work properly. That there is not sufficient independence of the fundamental rights officer, that the executive director has too much of an influence on the decisions that are being taken, and that they take answers from governments for granted, even if the allegations are very clear and well substantiated. And another finding that we had was Frontex is not allowed to work in host member states where the human rights are violated seriously. But that means that Frontex must really be proactive and really needs to find out themselves how member states perform. In the case of Hungary, for instance, it was the Frontex was already informed for years and years that things were going wrong, that asylum seekers were simply pushed back, that the asylum procedure was not in place, etc., etc. But it took 6 years before they finally decided to suspend their operations there. And regarding Greece, we also saw that there was no clear assessment of what has happened there to see if they could in any case stay there and keep on supporting, because you can imagine if they keep on supporting a member state which is violating the human rights, they actually indirectly are facilitating those violations as well. So it is very important that they are now, we have come up with a report, we have come up with a lot of recommendations. Tomorrow, we will have a meeting with Frontex where they are going to explain what they are doing with our recommendations.
Okay. Quite interesting. And actually, the whole topic about immigration and asylum is very much a current news topic, because as you know, there are quite a few problems at the Belarus border with Poland and Lithuania, where the EU is facing what some are calling hybrid warfare, where basically Belarus, who has very bad relations with the EU following the sham of an election that took place last year already, basically use immigrants as a weapon against the EU by bringing immigrants and then throwing them at the EU borders to try to create a political crisis there. So, what do you think about this process of what we could call a weaponization of refugees, which, as far as I know, has never occurred before?
It's a very dangerous development, and we saw it happening for the first time with Erdogan in March 2020, when it decided to bring a large number of migrants to the border with Greece, the land border, half a year ago, I think, with Morocco. Yeah. When it sent migrants to the Spanish border. And in both of these countries, the EU has struck a deal. I mean, with Turkey, it's very clear. We give Turkey a lot of money in exchange for that Turkey is keeping the refugees there, or readmitting refugees who have entered the EU. And well, this also makes us a little bit vulnerable because, the human rights situation is very bad in Turkey. I mean, many people are in jail. There's no freedom of media. There are actually very big rule of law problems. Mm-hmm. And then if Turkey is being attacked, he can very easily use this vulnerable point of the EU, like, okay, then I will just, press the button and send migrants to you. This is exactly what Morocco did, because it was also about recognition of a political, it was a decision by Spain, which was not politically pleasant for Morocco. And now with Lukashenko, we see him copying this behavior, actually. Actually, you are right. I mean, Lukashenko should not be there at all, because he did not win the elections a year ago. And he is now oppressing the people who had actually won the elections, and there are huge human rights violations. And I think that the EU should have responded much tougher from the beginning already towards Lukashenko. It took a long time before the first set of sanctions was adopted by the EU. Now, hopefully next week, we get another set of sanctions. It's the 5th package, I believe. But, because it took such a long time and the sanctions were always limited, Lukashenko's still there. And now he has targeted the EU with indeed abusing migrants and using them as a tool for trying to hit us. People call it a hybrid war. It's true. It is an attack. The war, mentioning the war is a little bit
of a strong term. Yeah,
it's a strong term. But I think what is very important is that we distinguish that on the one hand, that we condemn and sanction Lukashenko also for this behavior, mm-hmm. but that we do not fall in the trap of playing with the migrants, using them as a tool as well in this conflict. And I criticize the Polish government and the Lithuanian government for doing so, because, people are sent to their borders. And they are pushed back immediately also by Poland and Lithuania, although they see that they are not admitted again on the Belarusian territory. So these people are now ended up in a land strip. They cannot get any water or food or shelter or medical treatment. Especially the Polish government keeps everyone away. No one is able to go there. So 10 people have already died. And I think this is not the answer that the EU should give, because now the migrants are being victim also of the EU policies.
And speaking of which, then what should we do with these refugees? Because on the one hand, okay, they are poor people. They're in a way they are the victims in this, and they didn't ask for this, and they wanted to go in the EU, and they find themselves in the middle of a struggle between the EU and Lukashenko. But at the same time, the EU can. It's difficult for Poland and then the EU to accept, so to say, to open the borders to them, because then Lukashenko can just keep sending them, and we know since 2015 that it creates a lot of political problems, including into individual member states, and to an extent, I mean, the issue we see in migration and asylum policy that rose from 2015 are still 6-7 years later still haven't been fixed. So what should the EU, what should Poland do with these people?
Yes, of course, it is a dilemma. You don't want to trigger even more buses and planes coming to Belarus and then to the border with the EU. But I think we should respond in two ways. On the one hand, indeed, more sanctions on Lukashenko and trying to stop those charters, stop those planes by entering in negotiations with those countries of origin, and making sure also with campaign awareness raising campaigns or whatever, showing the people that it makes no sense in paying 6,000 euros and coming to Belarus. But the people who are already there, we cannot leave them just to die in the cold of the winter and without any basic needs. So I think we should give them access to a swift and fair asylum procedure in decent reception conditions, and then have a very quick scan on, are there people in need for protection or not? And if not, also make very clear that then they need to be returned. And those who are in need of protection, because there are people coming from Afghanistan, from Syria, and also from Iraq, not everyone is able to return, then there for these people, I mean, Poland and Lithuania did not have a lot of asylum seekers until now. But if they cannot take care of them, there should be a way to have an equal responsibility sharing among the member states. So try to stop the flow from migrants coming, really do everything what is possible, but treat the people who are stuck there with dignity and in line with our own EU law. Because otherwise, if we also violate our own laws, what's then the value of the EU?
And speaking of reaction, so the actually it didn't start with the Lukashenko push, or at least weaponization of migrants. It started a few months ago, but we've seen a number of member states asking for the EU to fund walls, fences at the borders, at the external borders of the EU. And so far, the EU has refused, and on the other hand, the member states are arguing on the one hand that they have a duty by law to protect the external border of the EU. That's part of the Schengen deal. And at the same time, now in the context of Lukashenko, they say, well, given the pressure that we have at our border and the pressure that is not only migratory but also political from Belarus, do you think that the EU should give a special treatment to this case because it's not, let's say, a regular immigration kind of case, what's happening at the Belarus border, and so fund these walls? Or should we just say, no, there should be no EU-funded walls at all on external borders?
The Schengen rules also do have two types of obligations. On the one hand, indeed, refuse entrance of people who do not have an authorization to enter. That's clear. But also give the possibility for people who are in need for protection, so who want to ask for asylum. This is also in the Schengen rules. And I think we should not be selective in that. And it is able, we are able to combine the two. But if we start fencing our borders, it can become de facto impossible to ask for asylum. That's the problem. We also see it now with Poland, for instance, and Lithuania. They redirect migrants back to Belarus and say, you can enter through the official border crossing points. But that is the problem. This is de facto not possible, because then the Belarusian soldiers do not allow them to go to the official border crossing points, because therefore you need a visa or you need the papers, which is the normal rule.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's instead of just saying we want fences, to see how can we make sure that people who are on our at our borders and our need for protection can still given an opportunity to apply for asylum, while at the same time we can become more effective in guarding our borders. And with fences and walls, I see it's actually only protecting our borders and not protecting the rights of refugees. So I think we should stick to the position that we don't do that. It was a position, a long-standing position of the Parliament, but also of the Commission.
Mm-hmm.
And you cannot make an exemption for this case, because then, I mean, Greece will also say we have the same situation with Turkey. Hungary may say that for its neighboring countries. So then you create a precedent where all border countries will rely on. It's the same with, actually, we see pushbacks now at the Belarusian border, because people are already on the European border and then being pushed back. If we just accept that, then others, it's a kind of impunity.
Yeah, it's a precedent. Yeah. I hear you. I see a question in chat. Since you mentioned that one solution should be, if Lithuania and Poland cannot deal with the flow of migrants, they should be fairly redistributed among member states. And EBS is asking if there is already in EU law a specific mechanism that would allow to redistribute these refugees among member states.
No, that's really a problem. This is still under negotiation. We have, if it comes to how the asylum seekers are being distributed, this is actually the rule is that the country of first entrance is and remains responsible for the asylum seekers. And this is the whole difficulty with the asylum policy in Europe. It's not equally divided, because the border countries, of course, they are the one where people enter for the first time. And then, according to the current rules, they can, at a certain moment when they have too high pressure, ask other member states to step in, to relocate asylum seekers from them. But this is still on a voluntary basis. Mm-hmm. Maybe some people remember that in 2016, when many people, Syrian refugees, entered the EU from Turkey, and you saw, and also in Italy, there was massive arrivals. That then the Commission made a decision for relocation from people from the Greek islands, from Hungary, and from Italy. But that was a unique measure. That Hungary and some other countries have challenged this for the Court of Justice, but they did not get what they wanted. So the Court just said this is binding. But that was a unique decision. Normally, it's on a voluntary basis. And this is also what we saw during the recent years when there were was a lot of pressure for relocation, especially for children from the Greek islands, because we all saw the overcrowded camps, but it took place on a very, very small scale.
And sorry, since we're on that, we like you mentioned, so there is no current mechanism, and it's part of the negotiations that are taking place. But these negotiations have been stuck in place for quite some time. And actually, I remember a bit more than a month ago, I had one of your colleagues on the channel, Sylvie Guillaume, so French socialist MEP, and I asked her back then whether she was optimistic on whether the EU would find a solution soon enough on migration. And she said that she was actually quite pessimistic. She did not see how at the moment there could be a compromise at EU level on migration. So do you share this pessimism on the state of negotiations?
Yeah, I fully share this. And the longer we negotiate, the more clear it becomes that it will be very, very hard. What we hear from the council is that it's almost already stranded, and I think really if we don't get another distribution system, so eco-responsibility sharing, we will never get a good European asylum policy. And the Commission proposal was already not very strong on that. It still had this criterion of first entry responsibility, but then it said, but there is an obligatory solidarity, but member states can choose if they pay money to the border country, if they deploy some officials over there, or if they relocate people. I already found that too weak, because I think you need a safeguard of really also physical responsibility sharing. But what I see now is that it's even this proposal of the Commission is being weakened in the Council. And only a week ago, we got the proposal from the rapporteur in the European Parliament. So he's in lead, let's say, for negotiating on a common position in the Parliament. Mm-hmm. And also he came up with a proposal in which he lowered actually the standard of solidarity. So, and if we don't get a solution on that, we will not get the southern member states on board for other reforms or whatever. So then it will be stuck, I'm afraid.
So do you think there should be, even if you find it insufficient, that there should be at least to unstuck the decision, like something that is less than ideal in your view, but something that could gather consensus to unlock the situation, and then later on down the track, maybe with government changes, when the state of economy changes, maybe revisit these rules? If I understand?
Yeah, well, at least indeed, if there should be some movement in more equal responsibility sharing. It was in the previous term in the European Parliament, had a proposal, had a common position, like the idea that if people have entered the EU or ask for protection, then there would be a kind of automatic distribution of asylum seekers. Mm-hmm. This is what we should go for. But of course, if we need to get there in stages, have a first step and then later on, I mean, that would be fine for me. But actually, I think we don't have a lot of time because you see that this obstacle also leads to substandard conditions at the border, in the camps, to pushbacks, because what border countries do is find creative solutions and not to have this responsibility, and that leads in the end to a non-compliance with our asylum law to give access to an asylum procedure.
And so now we're talking about the legal answer directly at the border, how member states are dealing with the migrants once they arrive at the border. But like you mentioned, one practice that has been developing for a few years is to deal with it from the source. So to have the EU conclude deals here with the transit country, so Morocco, Turkey, etc., or even with the country of origin of the migrants, so that the people do not leave this country in the first place, and often it involves basically the EU writing checks for this country to keep the migrants in these countries. Do you agree with this approach of trying to conclude deal with the transit or origin country to try to prevent people from leaving in the first place?
Yeah, well, if it means that fighting root causes will also mean that there's no reason anymore for people to depart from their country, that there's no reason anymore to flee because there's no war or there's a rule of law, or if there is enough economic perspective. I mean, that should be our overall goal, I think, to make sure that people have perspective in their own country. But that is a long-term objective, of course. That will not happen overnight. So people will find reasons to flee their own country, and not only heading to Europe, but if you look at Africa, there's much more mobility within Africa than from Africa to the EU. We sometimes tend to forget that. With cooperating on migration, it could be a good way. There are some good objectives with that. For instance, most of the refugees are outside of the EU. 86% of the refugees worldwide stays in the region, in often poor countries, fragile countries, and they need a lot more support in order to host the refugees and offer them real perspective in their societies. And this is what we really should step up much more, also together with other countries like US, Canada, Australia, and so on. But we cannot leave the refugee responsibility only to those countries, of course. We should also take our responsibility, especially for more vulnerable refugees who need more care than they can get in those regions. And this is a resettlement, of course, working with the UN in order to invite those refugees, to offer them safe and legal pathways. Well, this part of the cooperation on migration is not very well developed. This is still also based on in the hands of member states. It's on a voluntary basis that they can decide, should I invite refugees or not? So the cooperation is very much focused on indeed keeping migrants or refugees somewhere else. And then if you think of transit countries, in not all the transit countries you have sufficient asylum systems or human rights safeguards. And in my report, what the Parliament adopted, we said, before you enter in such a deal, you should make sure, you should do a kind of assessment if a refugee gets stuck in another country. Is he or she safe there? Can he or she build a future over there? And otherwise, we should first build that system somewhere before we just, let people stuck in a limbo situation. So there need to be safeguards and conditions for having these deals, because these deals are mostly about we pay money for them to to control their borders better, or to readmit people from us. So that means, in any case, that they take over responsibility for people who are actually in need for protection. So that's something that should be first in place, a good protection system, and we should monitor also how this works. And I think, and this is also what the Parliament said in the report, there should be more focus on the countries of origin, because there a migrant, if it's safe, of course, to return, there the person can really reintegrate or has certain rights. But in a transit country, someone can still be left without any rights. So you cannot just think of your own interest. You need to be sure that migrants' interests are not violated.
And going back to inside the EU, so it's no secret that the topic of migration has become politically toxic in many member states. And we have seen, for instance, in Germany, part of the re-emergence of the far right in Germany is credited to the German answer to the migration crisis, or the Wirtschaft das of Angela Merkel. So it allowed the AfD, it helped the AfD rise in Germany. How do you explain? How do you detoxify such a debate, something that is seen as toxic, and then in the end prevent or makes it less politically viable for member states to do something about migration in a way that is, some would say, welcoming, in accordance to human rights, etc., etc.?
I think politicians play a very important role here. And I think that actually you cannot blame Merkel a lot for what she said was we have to respect the Refugee Convention. This is actually what she said. But she was not backed by the other member states, and she was standing alone. And therefore, she was under heavy attack within Germany. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very important that the EU is united in the political message that the EU should also take its fair share in the responsibility for refugees worldwide. I mean, the whole Refugee Convention started because of the war in Europe. I mean, we were the refugees, actually. So we cannot shy away from that responsibility and just leave it to other continents. And if we say, you know, if we make that clear together, and then it is doable, and then we don't leave room for such divided policies, actually. It's important that people see that it's doable and that's necessary to do so. And I think people can understand this message. But what you see instead is that many politicians are actually more increasing the fears of people instead of showing that it is possible to do so. And many politicians talk about, you know, in terms of waters, like floods are coming here, and you know we cannot cope with that, and they all want to come here, etc., and link it to security questions. And of course, that makes people also a bit scared, and these people are unknown. So you can fear for your own position. I can understand that. So therefore, I think politicians should be aware of that, of the impact of what they say and how they say things. And I think also that you have to look at the other movement also in Europe. We see many municipalities who stood up in the times when we saw those Greek islands and this humanitarian crisis, that they said, we can have some of these refugees. Let them come to us. We can welcome them. We can integrate them. And I really think you see more and more people also saying, we don't want these border policies being conducted on my behalf, on our behalf. This is not the Europe that we want. So, yeah. But therefore, you need to be united and show some leadership. And then I think it would be possible.
Okay.
And maybe also to add, because we talked about now internal, but think of Libya, for instance, what we are doing there. We just pay Libya so that the Libyan Coast Guard intercepts everyone in the Mediterranean Sea, whereas we all know that they end up in horrible detention centers in Libya. This is also our responsibility, and I think we can only live in an EU with values and with rights if we also recognize these rights and values for refugees or for people that we also have responsibility for, and not shying away or deterring and think that it's not our concern. Thank you. I wanted to add that.
No, but that's a perfectly valid point. Moving on, but not really moving on because it's a bit linked. Since you mentioned you work on Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, we know that there has been quite a few unsavory developments over the past few months there, and there was quite a few worries that the fact that Taliban came back into power could trigger a new refugee crisis towards the EU, and the Taliban themselves are trying to use that as a way to get money from the EU as part of the transition in power. How do you see the relationship with Afghanistan now that the Taliban are in power?
Yeah. Well, the EU has listed a number of conditions for before which the Taliban should meet before it would even consider of recognizing that regime, and these conditions are strict and fair. For instance, that fundamental rights should be complied with, women's and girls' rights and their participation should be ensured, and another number of these conditions. I really hope and I urge the EU not to start compromising on these conditions, just indeed in order to make sure that people are not fleeing the country or one way or another. I mean, that would be very, very dangerous. I mean, we also have a responsibility there for the Afghan people, especially those who worked with us and the women who managed to, you know, to take a role, become judges or whatever, are now in the most severe and threatening positions. So we must protect them, monitor their human rights. And of course, there at the same time, there are huge humanitarian problems. We have had a drop there. They are very much depending on international aid if it comes to the economy, but also even very basic needs. Mm-hmm. So there are big threats now. And I would say what the parliament says is humanitarian aid should be stepped up, but not through the Taliban. So use international organizations, local communities, and of course use the Taliban, cooperate with the Taliban where we need them to get access to the people, but not that they get the money for their policies and for them ruling the country. I think that should be very, very clear. We must help the people, but that should not lead to supporting or facilitating or legitimizing the Taliban. And this is a difficult exercise.
Yeah, and actually that was going to be my next question. How do we reconcile the bit of a paradox? Because on the one hand, like we mentioned, there was a kind of a fear that there would be a new refugee crisis triggered by the arrival to power of the Taliban. So there was in a way a push from the member states say, okay, let's try to prevent Afghan refugees to arrive in Europe, and at the same time, member states are very much aware and want publicly say that they want to help people who do not want to live in a Taliban Afghanistan, who are at risk with the Taliban, to help them leave the country. So how do we reconcile this bit of a paradox of a position?
Yeah, exactly. Of course, you saw in the first stage the evacuation of people who worked for us. That was a very direct responsibility, of course. But now we get the category of people who have a high risk of persecution by the Taliban. And now you already see it becomes a little bit more difficult, like who is going to take the responsibility for that? And there was, in the beginning, also not a lot of appetite for resettlement, so really organized, safe travel to EU countries. There has been a special meeting, a resettlement forum, where every member state could give pledges, say, okay, we will take in so many refugees, etc. But it's going very, very, very slowly and difficult, and we really have to see how it's implemented. Actually, you know, Afghan refugees, I don't see where they can go, because the EU wants to pay money to the neighboring countries, to Pakistan and Iran, to make sure that they are hosting them. But both countries, they are really pretty reluctant to do so. They say we already have a lot of refugees, which is true. But they also have their relationship with the Taliban. So not everyone will be safe there. Turkey, Erdogan has said very clearly, we have already so many Syrian refugees, we're not going to take them in. And Turkey has no asylum system, actually. So Afghan people do not have a possibility to ask for asylum in practice. So where will they end up? We all know that they may be in need of protection. So I really hope that there will be a kind of international commitment where it is said very clearly, okay, we need to take this responsibility together. But up until now, this leadership has not not been proven.
And one final question on that. I mean, we've been talking about quite depressing topic when you think about it. We've been talking about pushbacks, migration, Afghanistan, and you tend to specialize on this topic. Isn't it a bit like depressing to work almost only on such issues? How do you like wake up in the morning and say, oh well, I'm gonna do something that I know is stuck, has been stuck for 7 years, is likely gonna be stuck for quite some time more, so why do I wake up in the morning?
Going to, this is asked more often, and it's very difficult to explain. You know, I also used to work at the university. I'm professor of migration law, and I was already very much engaged and involved in these problems. And of course, it's also frustrating to being in the middle of this political decision-making process. But on the other hand, I prefer to be in that process, to try to influence the debate, to influence decision-making, instead of being on a sideline and having criticism, because that may even be more frustrating. So I have the feeling, although it's very little, I completely immediately admit that, but at least that I can play a role. And also with my working visits, I was 2 weeks ago at the Belarusian border. I was in Samos and Greece in May, and I meet a lot of lawyers and NGOs and people and refugees on the ground. And believe me, they are in a much worse position than I am. And I always feel admiration for their persistence of working for the good cause in very difficult circumstances. So then I think, okay, who am I to complain? And I need to be there also for them, to be their voice and to try to achieve something.
Okay. Let's go back closer to home, actually. Let's talk about the Netherlands, your country. How would you describe the relationship of the Netherlands with the EU? What would you call the Dutch approach to the EU?
Yeah, it's a difficult. There's not one approach, but I would say for a long time, the Netherlands took the EU very much for granted. I mean, we were part of the EU, and we benefited very much from the communitarian approach because we were so small. So we needed this EU framework for our interest. And I think we felt very much part of the EU. However, because we took it so much for granted, it was never a discussion. And then all of a sudden, and you had the referendum in France as well in 2005, there was this referendum, and then all of a sudden some more, let's say, right-wing and left-wing populist parties started to campaign intensively against this referendum, this decision for a constitution in the EU. And actually, many people were taken by surprise, also the governments. So it was a no at the end of the referendum. And that has changed the discourse very much. There's much more Euroscepticism since then in the EU and also in the Netherlands, also in the political decision-making. Although, on the other hand, everyone, there's no appetite at all of an exit or whatever, but very much on like sometimes live with distrust on other countries, especially southern countries. You know, if there's a financial crisis or whatever, and many people in the Netherlands always have the feeling we pay too much for other countries for and we are always the best one performing, and the others just not abide by the rules of the Stability Pact and things like that. So we try to gain as much influence as possible, but not always in a very loyal way, I would say.
And speaking of influence, so let's talk about your current caretaker prime minister, so Mark Rutte, who has been prime minister before. Mark Rutte is often credited for having allowed your country to, in a way, punch above its weight at EU level. Do you think that it's true that Mark Rutte had a role to allow the Netherlands to be more influential than its size would normally imply?
Right, but that's a little bit of a strange allegation. Huh? I think everyone tries to have as much influence as possible.
Of course, but he's succeeding.
It depends on what other countries give you for influence. Huh? So, well, what I think is that, of course, the Dutch government tries to do so. And this is what I mean with not always in a loyal way. I think sometimes they use their veto really for their own specific interest, often linked to economic or financial interest. And I think you can only get an effectively functioning EU if you're looking beyond this mere limited interest, because in the end, the benefit of being a part of the EU as a whole is much bigger than that. I think in many cases, European interest is the same as the national interest.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
So yeah, a bit more loyalty should fit.
All right. Then to my very final question, which is a classic on the channel. What do you think about the debate about a federal European Union? Are you in favor? Are you against? Are you in between? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm very much used to this EU muddling through, so to say, and doing a little bit of this and then going back and then trying to. For me, you know, in principle, I would prefer, I think, to have a kind of federational EU. I think with a clear structure. Where you have the competences at the more local or state level, where possible, but where needed, a strong system at the federal level, where you not all the time need to, you know, to struggle and to fight for the right decision making, because this is really what is hampering also the EU, I think. And with the federal level, you would also have a better democratic and judicial system. So then we would have more institutional checks and balances, which would also be beneficial for European citizens, I think.
Okay, well, that's pretty clear. That's quite interesting as a position. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah. So before I start my debrief, first, thank you again for taking the time to answer my question. And before you go, I will give you the final word. So say whatever you would like to say to our audience before you go enjoy the rest of your evening.
Yeah, my final words. Yeah, it may have been quite a depressing hour, but it's the reality of today. We have more realities that are very sad, which is the regression of the rule of law in many of our countries, and I think they are both very much related. I mean, not giving people access to protection is also a big deficiency in the rule of law safeguards that we have. And we should not underestimate the importance of having the rule of law in place for every citizen in every member state. I really think that if the EU is not coming up with an adequate, effective answer, so meaning that member states are not going to think of their own interest and therefore not bothering with Poland or not, you know, accepting what Hungary is doing, then really we are on the edge of a big crisis in the EU. We are already in a rule of law crisis, but this is related to the whole functioning of the EU. So I would urge member states, but maybe through your channel, also citizens, to urge their governments, please do not let the regression of rule of law go, because without rule of law, we don't have mutual trust, we don't have cooperation, and we don't have protection for our own citizens. So please, let's uphold our rule of law values and rights.
All right, you heard it, chat. Get involved on the rule of law and on anything related to the EU. That's why we are here. Tineke Strik, thank you again for taking the time. Chat, make sure to thank her. You can see Twitter at below the video feed, so make sure to follow her on the social media. I hope you enjoyed it, Mrs. Strik. The interview, it was very interesting. Thank you again. I hope you will be able to recommend that to your colleagues, and I hope that I will have the occasion to welcome you again on the channel in the future. And on this note, well, let's start the debriefing. So thank you, Mrs. Strik.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Good luck with your channel.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. So let's start the debriefing. So let me just up and zoom. There we go. So, tell me, did you like the interview? Was it interesting? Did you get bored? No, I don't think it was boring. Quite the contrary. The topics were very, very newsworthy. I mean, there are literally votes and debates happening in the parliament right now on the topics of Belarus. The Polish border, etc., etc. So let's start with a bit more what I took note of. So first thing that she mentioned was that she has the tough job of being coordinator of Libe. So for those of you who don't know what a coordinator is, a coordinator in a committee is a bit is the boss of his political group within the committee. So within the Libe committee, so the committee on home affairs, etc. She is leading all the Greens MEP. So she's a bit overseeing the work for the Greens. She represents the Green in political decision. Let's say higher level political discussion between the groups. So it's quite an important position. It's one of the most important position, most influential position, especially, and it's difficult, especially in Libe. Libe is notorious for being a very, very difficult committee, very demanding. It's very intense. It's usually you tend to respect someone who works in Libe and is actually like involved in Libe, and even more so the coordinators, because it's complicated work, both at technical level, at political level. So it's you not everyone can be coordinator in Libe. I will just say that. What else did we discuss? We talked about Frontex, so the EU agency in charge of helping member states with checking on borders, the external borders of the EU. So indeed, like you mentioned, Frontex has been. Bye, Chaos. Have a good one. Thanks for coming. I was saying something interesting. Yes, Frontex evolved quite a bit over the years, because it started from a very small agency, like more about sharing competencies and more like a coordination kind of role, to now potentially a huge kind of agency, because in the latest iteration of Frontex, you can have up to 10,000 border guards. So I mean, there was even like everyone back then made fun of a video where they unveiled the uniform of the Frontex guard. Actually, let me try to get that. I will show you, because the video was quite funny. Frontex uniform. Yeah, sure, Google. Perfect. I will show you that in a second. Let me switch my browser up. What do I want? I want this. I can see. So you can see they showcased very proudly their new the new uniform. Everyone made fun of it back then. I mean, even if the uniform is okay, it looks good, but yeah, they were pretty proud of that. And I'll go back to the discussion, because I don't particularly need to have a a fashion show about Frontex. But yeah, Frontex is now a more and more important kind of a EU agency. A lot of responsibility, a lot of people in there these days, and also quite a bit of polemics because of the so-called pushbacks, or the practice from some member state and beyond to literally prevent migrants from reaching the territory of a member state by pushing them back towards where they come from, which is illegal under international law to do so. And so there are arguments on whether Frontex allowed it to happen, say nothing, or even participated in that. What else did we discuss? We discussed, of course, quite a long time, Belarus, what's happening at the border, and the fact that Belarus is weaponizing refugees by literally they're encouraging refugees to board planes to come in Belarus, and then they escort them to the border with the EU, so Poland or Lithuania, with soldiers, and then they throw them at the border to put pressure on the EU. She mentioned, and that was to an extent true, that it was not the first time that it was used, that Turkey and Morocco did it in the past. That's true in this. I say it's true because indeed, at some point when they wanted to put political pressure on the EU, Turkey and Morocco allowed quite a lot of refugees to try to go to the EU. So they pretended that they were not guarding the border until they reach a deal with the EU or the member state. In this kind of, in the case of Morocco, it was more of a problem with Spain directly, because basically Spain accepted to welcome the leader of the Polisario Front, so the part of the Sahara that wants to break up from Morocco. So the guy came to Spain to get medical treatment, and Morocco got pissed off by that, and so they suddenly 10,000 people arrived at the border with between Morocco and Spain, because there is a terrestrial border, a land border between Morocco and Spain, and there is the enclaves of Ceuta and Melilla. But it didn't reach the same scale as Belarus. Belarus really did it from build this up, and is throwing body for a sustained amount of time at the EU to try to trigger political problems, and to push the EU to stop to engage with the Belarus government, and to reach a deal with it, and so to recognize the Belarus government and to drop the sanction, because the Belarus government is not recognized by the EU, because the elections that took place last year were not exactly fair, and the person that is mostly considered to have won the election is now in exile, in Lukashenko. So the current president of Belarus is in control, but nobody recognizes him apart from Russia. Russia has been for a long time supporting Belarus, so Belarus now survives mostly because of Russia. And the EU took a bunch of sanctions against Belarus, whether it is individual decisions, so preventing some key people from going in the EU and beyond, freezing assets, also forbidding a number of products made in Belarus from going into the on the EU market, that sort of thing, to build up pressure and sanction the Belarus. She mentioned it as well, the fact that Belarus is throwing literally bodies and refugees at the border with Poland and Lithuania, created a bit of a no man's land, because of course when these refugees arrive at the border of Poland stops them. They say no, you can't enter here, go away. But then when the refugees try to walk back actually to in Belarus. The soldiers, the border of Belarus say no, you can't come in Belarus. You have to go in the EU, and so these people are stuck in a no man's land between Poland and Belarus without access to a number of things, especially in Poland, because in Poland where Poland created like a complete no-go zone around the border, where like no one can go. Journalists, NGOs are not allowed to step near that. And there, she mentioned 10 people died already at the border between Belarus and Poland because of the situation, because they obviously they don't have supplies, they can't get medical treatment, it's cold, etc., etc. So people are dying out there in all this. And Poland, I noted Poland as a keyword there. So I imagine it's because of the way they dealt with it. Because Poland is as a government that is not in good terms with Brussels because of the rule of law. And they are, since it's an ultra-conservative government, they're not very keen on migrants, which is one of the reasons why Belarus has been sending tons of migrants at them. And so they triggered emergency states at the border with Belarus to be able to do whatever they wanted and to prevent refugees from entering. And they're doing that quite loudly, also because they have a political interest in that. Since they're the government has been in difficulty a bit because of its troubles with rule of law and with Brussels, and so using this crisis, it tried to say, oh yeah, you see, the government is protecting Polish people against migrants, so we are helping you, we're acting in the interest of citizens. If we're not there, it's gonna be the apocalypse, yada yada. You know the deal. One of the so like I mentioned, Belarus is helping migrants to get to the border of Poland. So how did they do that? They actually have the tons of planes now doing back and forth between Belarus and the different third countries. So for instance, between Iraq and Belarus, they're now like the national Belarus airline company that is doing like daily back and forth between the two countries to help to get the refugees to the Polish border. And these people when they arrive in Belarus, they are escorted to the Polish border, and then they are left there in limbo. And so there has been quite a push from the EU to against the airlines, so to stop them from participating to that. So it goes on the one hand, going for instance to Iraq, telling the Iraqi government, okay, stop organizing flights between Belarus and Iraq, because that's not okay for us, and you need us for support, etc., etc. It's also taking sanctions against the Belarus national airline company, which is of course acting on the basis of political orders. There's also a debate about forcing companies that lease planes, because a lot of planes of company are actually not owned by the airline company; they are on lease, and so as it happens, quite a number of these companies that lease planes are established in the EU, in Ireland notably. So there's quite some push or debates, or at least to put an obligation on these leasing company to stop providing planes to Belarus, so that they can't bring people at the Polish border. So that's part of the discussion. We had a long discussion about the distribution of refugees within the EU, with a on-point question from EBS on that, because indeed there is no mechanism today to distribute refugees among member states, which creates a lot of tension, because of course the countries that are on the front line, so to say, currently Poland, Lithuania, but in the past, or even currently, Italy and Greece. They are in the front line. They have to bear the brunt of the immigration wave. And these people, they're like, okay, we can't take them all, share the burden. And the other countries are like, yeah, but no, we don't really want to get refugees. They entered first in your country, so it's your responsibility. So that's part of the tensions in there, because the country on the front line want to get the other, that's a legitimate concern, want to get the other countries to help them take at least their fair share of the migration burden, and that's at the core of the discussion on the asylum policy, and it leads to kind of of paradoxical position, because, for instance, on the far right, if you remember, at some point there was Matteo Salvini, so the far right, one of the far right leaders in Italy, who was vice prime minister of the Italian government. And back then, one of his big thing was to say, oh well, we want other countries to take in immigrants, because Italy should not be the ones who welcome all the illegal migrants. And the irony is that a lot of the best friends of Matteo Salvini in other countries, think Viktor Orban in Hungary, Marine Le Pen in France, etc., they don't want to hear anything about getting refugees from other countries. So, sometimes they all say, oh yeah, we are against migration, etc. We are all friends on the far right, but then they don't want to help each other, because Hungary doesn't want immigrants, even if it comes from its good friend Matteo Salvini. So it's a bit of the one of the paradox of the far right. What else do I have on my piece of paper that I could tell you? She mentioned the principle of first entry responsibility. So that's what we used to call the Dublin rule. The Dublin rule in asylum and migration policy is the fact that when an illegal migrant, an asylum seeker, that's the proper term, an asylum seeker arrives in the EU, it is the country in which it first entered that is responsible for that to process the asylum seeker's request. So an asylum seeker arrives in Greece. It's Greece who is responsible for that asylum seeker, even if the migrants move on. So that same migrant arrives in Greece. Let's say he ends up in Germany. He gets caught. Germany will say, well, that's all fine that you want to do an asylum request in Germany, but actually it's not us. You have to do that in Greece, because Greece is the country in which you entered. So Greece is the one who is supposed to deal with that. So they send back the person to Greece, because that's Greece was the first country of entry. So that's another key part of the discussion at EU level on the future of the asylum policy, because of course during the 2015 refugee crisis, this principle became quite criticized by the countries who were on the front line on this, and on the other end, the other don't want to come back on this. What else did we discuss? Le Wir schaffen das. So Wir schaffen das is the expression that Angela Merkel used in 2015 when she said that she declared that Germany could welcome refugees in Germany. She said, "Wir schaffen das, we can do it," and the sentence became a bit of a symbol of a policy in the refugee crisis. A lot of people back then have been saying that by saying that Merkel saved Europe's honor by doing that, by saying, okay, we can deal with refugees, we can welcome them, we have the capacity to do so. I think she misunderstood what I was saying, because she said, oh well, we can't blame Merkel for saying that that Germany could welcome refugees. That was not exactly the point I was making. The point I was making is that the Wir schaffen das, which is considered to be a decision that Merkel took because of a personal conviction, is one of the few times where Merkel acted because of her own instinct. I mean, as a reminder, Merkel herself, she is quite familiar with this issue because she's from what used to be Eastern Germany, so she knows what it is of having people trying to leave the country to go into another. So she could have sympathy for people trying to leave a dictatorship, like it was the case in back then. But still, a declaration via Schaffendas came under quite a lot of criticism because she declared that, but the problem is that she did that unilaterally without coordinating with the other member state. So she made the declaration, and then the other countries around Germany were like, "What the fuck?" Because like Austria was like, "Yeah, that's all nice that Germany wants to do that, but to get to Germany, they need to go through Austria." And I was not consulted. I don't know how to do that, and there was no coordination. So there was a lot of criticism of Merkel for this decision, because she took it without warning, without coordinating with the other to organize that. So, and they created, of course, like the refugees, when they heard that, say, "Oh, great, we're gonna go to Germany and start to walk or drive or whatever towards Germany," and the countries in the way were like, "What the hell are we doing?" So it was quite criticized, and like I mentioned during the interview, the Merkel policy to welcome refugees back then is considered to be among the reasons why the far right re-emerged in Germany, because before the AfD, so the current far right Alternative für Deutschland, was created prior to the refugee crisis, but before it was a country that it was a party that was a fringe party. It was a very small party, and it was dedicated to actually economic policy. It was created in the context of the Eurozone crisis. So when there was the Greek crisis, basically, and there was the help package from the EU to try to help save the Greek economy and the Eurozone. And so this kind of the people who didn't want it German budget to help the lazy Southerners, as they say, they created the AfD, and so they wanted to leave the euro to go back to the Deutsche Mark. They were against any kind of transfer at EU level of money, etc., etc. But they were a fringe party, and when the refugee crisis started in 2015, they rebranded themselves on the back of the Wir schaffen das policy to say, "Oh, we are against we are against illegal immigration. We're against the refugee coming to Germany. We're against the policy of Angela Merkel," and they gained a lot of people to their cause. And in the years, I think it was 2017, either 2016 or 2017. AfD gained, for the first time since the end of World War II, far right MPs were elected in Germany, because of this context of the refugee crisis that was used by the far right to re-emerge, and which in turn caused pressure on the CDU CSU and created a lot of debate within the German political landscape. But I will not dive deeply into that. That's not the topic of tonight. What else do I have on my paper? Afghanistan money, yes, because Afghanistan, the Taliban are back in power in Afghanistan, and one of the problem of the Taliban right now is that they don't have money, because most of the assets of Afghanistan were not in Afghanistan itself, but were in third country, in the US, in Germany, not in the Afghan central bank. And so these assets have been frozen when the Taliban took power, because the other country do not recognize the Taliban government, and ever since, well, the Afghan do not have don't have access to that money to finance to finance whatever they want to finance. And so the Taliban have been trying to convince the other country to unfreeze at least part of these of the money that they say is theirs, because they say that they need it to fight against the humanitarian crisis, to help the the economic recovery, to fight against COVID, that sort of thing. So there is quite a lot of a push of the Taliban there towards the other countries, and including the EU countries such as Germany. Germany is having, I think it owes about $50 billion of the Afghan treasury. And so the Taliban are saying to the Germans, oh, well, first it's our money, so we give us the money, and we need it to deal with the economic crisis, blah blah blah. And they also say, oh well, you know, if you don't give us the money, that means the life will be even more complicated in Afghanistan, and so, you know, that means that people will want to leave Afghanistan and go in Europe, in Germany. So, you know, you don't want refugees, so you better give us the money. So that's one of the arguments that they are using to try to convince the other country, without any success so far as I know. What else do I have on my notes? Netherlands. The Dutch lack of trust towards the south, indeed, because the Netherlands belongs to the group that are called the Frugals. So the Frugals are the group of member states, mostly from the northern Europe. So the Scandinavian countries, Netherlands and Germany. Those were the initial Frugals. Now it changed a little bit, but still, the Nordics and Netherlands are what we call the Frugals, which are the countries that are fiscally conservative. So they don't want the EU to spend money, to distribute money, and they don't want the EU budget. They don't want member states to send money to the southern state, because they consider that the way out of the economic crisis in southern countries, which are seen as lazy in a way, as a caricature, but they see them they're just bad at dealing with money, so they should get better. The way to solve the problem is not by giving them more money to mismanage, but rather for them to do the reforms, to make themselves better, rather than relying on the money of the hardworking Dutch or Swedish or whatever. You've never heard of the Frugal Four before? The Frugal Four were kind of a popular boys band the last couple of years, and they were quite pissed off. They lost part of the debate on this, because they used to have Germans with them. Germans are fiscally conservative, and Germany switched side with the COVID crisis to an extent. They did not switch completely side, but they switched side in the context of the COVID crisis, and that's why we have today the recovery fund, because there was this Franco-German push to create a separate European fund of 750 billion euros to help member states recover from the crisis. And the thing that was new at the time, is that part of the money was not cash coming from the national budget and transferred to the EU, but actually loans and debts that the EU would generate to finance investment. And that was new, because the EU until then was actually forbidden from having any kind of debts, and the EU could not have debts. It was not possible under the budget rules. And so, in the context of the COVID crisis, this recovery fund was created, which was the first time that there was this system. It was possible because the Germans switched side and said, okay, we're going to do that as part of the recovery. But that's why I'm saying they did not completely switch side, because Angela Merkel said, I support this recovery fund, but as a one-off policy. Like, it's because the situation is so exceptional that it is justified to do that. But it's not. It should not become like the new normal when it comes to budget policy. So that's why I'm saying that Germany did not completely switch side, and we'll see how it evolves with the new government, which is going to be socialists, Greens, and Liberals, because the Greens are definitely in favor of a more lax budget and fiscal rules, while the Liberals are completely against, and the SPD is divided. Notably, the guy we're supposed to likely going to be the next German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, is considered as as a fiscally conservative guy, so he's not particularly in favor of allowing big transfer money from Germany to the outside and against debt. So we'll see how it evolves in the future, especially since the EU is starting next year the process of revisiting its fiscal rules to know, okay, in the future, can the EU have debt, and should we maintain the obligation for all member states to not to have like a maximum amount of debt level, a maximum amount of budget deficit, that sort of thing. So it's part of the debates, economic debates that will take place next year, and in which German will be actually quite influential. And so going back on track, the frugal, so those who are fiscally conservative, now are led by the Dutch, and namely Mark Rutte, who is one of the considered among the most influential EU leaders, despite the fact that he comes from a small member state. But he has been quite unapologetic about the fact that he is a frugal. So yeah, and that's Mark Rutte, the current prime minister of the Netherlands. And I realized that at the very, very end, we did not talk at all about the rule of law. I completely got lost into the migration topics because it was quite interesting and newsworthy, and I completely forgot about the rule of law aspect. So that's on me. That's my fault. We didn't talk about Poland and all that. But I'm sure. I mean, we had talked about it quite a bit. If you want to know more, just go on the channel and look at the news review from 2-3 weeks ago. We've been talking a lot about the rule of law there, so you will have a ton of information there. Okay, well, if you have questions or remark, now is the time. Otherwise, I will start my conclusion. Checking the chat to see if I forgot anything. I don't see anything, and barring any question or comment in the next 10 seconds, I will start my conclusion. So I hope that you enjoyed the interview. It was quite interesting. Next week, not next week. The next interview is gonna be this Friday at 7:30. We're gonna welcome Latvian ECR MEP. So ECR, actually the conservative. So in between the right and the far right. He's the first ECR member that we're gonna have on the channel since the start. It's gonna be quite interesting because they tend to be a bit more Eurosceptic. His name is Robert Zille, and it's gonna be on Friday at 7:30 on the channel, and then on Sunday the EU News Review at 6 in French and at 8 in English. If you like what you saw tonight or heard, don't hesitate to follow me, of course, on the channel here on Twitch, but also on my other social media. I'm posting the links right now in chat, so Twitter, Discord, YouTube, Facebook, all the good things. You just have to click and hit follow. And on this note, I wish you all a good evening, and I hope I will see you on Friday, and if not, at a later point. Have a good one, guys. Bye!